Okay, everyone, this is John Barry. Good morning. I'm with the Department of Healthcare Policy and Financing. Candace, I'll get us started.
Thanks, John.
Okay, so we are here for, I believe this is the third in a series of stakeholder meetings for day program services for the HCBS waivers, and again, talking about day habilitation or DayHab. With us, we have Candace Bailey, Kira Acuna, Kelly O'Brien as our tech guru, and myself, John. And next slide, please. So as always, the mission of the department, improving healthcare access and outcomes for the people we serve while demonstrating sound stewardship of financial resources. Next slide, please. Purpose of today's meeting is to engage you stakeholders on proposed DayHab changes in response to COVID, and specifically receive input, suggestions, and ideas for flexible service delivery of specialized habilitation and supported community connections. Next slide, please. So our agenda today is, first of all, we're going to review the September 10th meeting. We're going to discuss rates limitations for the specialized habilitation tiers, receive feedback on the rates and the limitations, receive proposed tiered approach to the, and I forgot what SCC means again, to
Supported
that.
Community connections.
Thank you. I'm writing that down this time. Receive feedback on that and determine next steps. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so I'm not sure if Candace or Kira, you want to handle this? Okay, thank you.
Great, thank you so much, John. So welcome everybody. My name is Candace Bailey and I am the Community Options Benefits Section Manager at the department. And I wanted to take a moment to start off this meeting and to review kind of what we talked about a little bit in September 10th, go over that, give you guys a little, a few of the resources that we've provided. So just want to reiterate, we had a lot of technical difficulties on that day. If you remember, it was one of those really interesting moments where we had to pivot and change platforms as Adobe Connect was actually down nationwide. So it wasn't just the state of Colorado. And so we actually had to switch over to doing a Google Meet meeting so that we could continue to have our engagement. However, that did mean that the meeting was actually not able to be recorded. So our sincere apologies for that and the inconvenience of both having to switch the platform and also not having the recording available. So we did actually post the PowerPoint, which is on the website there. There's a link, the LTSS COVID-19 response webpage. That is where all of our PowerPoints actually that are in response to COVID are posted. The PowerPoint is actually posted for anyone that did not have an opportunity to participate and would like to go and take a look at it. During that meeting, we also went over the operational memo 20-083, which discusses some of the temporary modifications that are allowed to day habilitation services, and that link is also in the PowerPoint there. And Kira is doing an awesome job of posting them in the chat box for everybody as well, so thank you, Kira. We discussed the three-tiered approach proposal, if you will, for specialized habilitation, where it was Tier 1 was virtual only, Tier 2 is services as usual, essentially, so kind of continue as pre-pandemic services. And then Tier 3, the proposal was as an individual specialized habilitation type of service. We received some feedback on the tiered proposal, and generally I would say that the majority of the stakeholders actually were excited about this potential approach, and obviously it's, I think my favorite quote that I like to say from Jody Walters is, "The devils are in the details," which means rates. So we were able to take the feedback back. The group also discussed a potential similar approach to SCC services, so supported community connections. Next slide, please. Okay, so just a little review that the three-tiered structure is kind of as to what we're talking about, because we're going to go a little bit more in depth with rates and things like that today for this structure. I do want to pause really quick and just let everybody know that if you have questions, please feel free to go ahead and start typing them in the chat box, and we will take some time. It looks like John Berry put in a facilitator's note in there for us, which is super helpful. Thank you, John. But for those that are on the phone only, that John is going to go over the process for giving comments once we're to the point where we're looking for some engagement and discussion, once I have a chance to actually present some of the information. So again, just a review of the three-tiered structure for the specialized habilitation services. The tier 1, which would be virtual services only, so a lower reimbursement rate. This is for those members that enjoy the virtual service. They enjoy Zoom classes, if you will, and they're able to engage and participate, and it's working well for them. They aren't interested or ready to go back to group services or in-person services, and so this is a really great way for them to still be able to engage to a certain extent. And so we wanted to provide an option for that for those members. Tier 2 is essentially service as usual. So current service delivery model, the services are provided just like they were pre-pandemic, obviously with a lot of precautions and infection control procedures and things like that in place. But the reimbursement would remain the same. Everything would essentially stay the same. This is going to be for those members that are ready to return to in-person services in a group, that are really missing those group settings, for those members that really, that was what they needed, was the group interaction and things like that. So we wanted to make sure that we continue to provide those options for members as well. And then tier 3 was another option that we wanted, because we heard you all loud and clear that we needed more flexibility. We needed a way to provide services to members in a way that they needed. And so the tier 3 we are proposing is an individual specialized habilitation service. So this would be one-on-one, not in a group setting, not at a facility. The reimbursement rate would obviously have to be a little bit higher than the regular rate. However, this would mean, and this is something that we discussed quite a bit, that we would have to have a lower weekly maximum for the number of billable units or hours. And I know we talked about weekly, monthly. Right now we're couching it as weekly because it's easier to kind of wrap our heads around those numbers. We can kind of talk about how we roll that out in the future. So that was the structure and the tiers that we have proposed. Next slide, please. All right, so here's what everybody's been waiting for, the rates. So we went back and kind of worked with our rates department, worked with our budget department, and these are the rates that are proposed. I really almost wish I could have made that bottom little star about 32 font. I want to make this very clear. These are proposed draft rates. Nothing is final. So there is lots of opportunity for feedback, information that you all see. These are proposed. So these are the proposed rates. The only one that would be final is tier 2, because those rates currently exist as is. So they're levels 1 through 6, tier 1, 2, and 3. Obviously, as each tier, you get a higher rate based off of the services that are provided. I'll let it sit there for just a second. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so I want to talk about, because this is going to be an important part of today's discussion, the current limits that we have for day habilitation. So currently, for the DD waiver only, we actually have a maximum of 4,800 combined units of SpecHab, SCC, and Prevoke. So this is about 23 hours of services a week. And again, I want to be clear that this lower limit for those 3 services is specific to the DD waiver. We have another limit, which is for both waivers, which is the 7,112 combined units of specialized habilitation, supported community connections, Prevoke services, and supported employment services. This equals about 34 hours of services a week. And the reason why this is important is because, as you can see, when we are looking at trying to figure out how we can implement this in a budget neutral way, it is complicated because we are trying to figure out a way to do this without messing up the other services that folks may be utilizing. Next slide, please. Okay, proposed 3-tier specialized habilitation limits. So, the key here is this first bullet, is it has to remain cost neutral. The only way that we were given permission to be able to actually implement this is if we stayed budget neutral, which means it doesn't cost us any more money at all, which means including additional utilization. So we have to be very cognizant of not just the rate, but also the utilization. And it is something, given the incredibly dire budget situation that we are in, which, I mean, we talk about on the daily at this point, but it's real, and it's really, really dire at this point when we're talking a $4 billion shortfall, that we have to make sure that we are staying within our current budget that we have. So as part of that, because the units are all intertwined as far as the limitations, what we actually had to do is we had to look at average utilization, not authorization. So there's a very clear difference between what is authorized and what is utilized. And because the budget is built off of utilization, so how much we have been spending, that is the number we had to look at. So we had to take a look at what the current utilization is, and figure out a rate that would help us stay within that dollar amount. So I just wanted to lay the groundwork there. The limits, so just as a reminder, these limits are also combined with SCC, pre-voc, and supported employment, so that's a key takeaway there. Members are not going to be able to receive all 3 tiers of specialized habilitation in the same week. There is just no way for that to be feasible and remain budget neutral. Tier 2 cannot be provided during the same week as Tier 1 and 3. However, Tier 1 and 3 may be provided in the same week. So if you have a member, albeit, if you have somebody that needs individualized one-on-one services and can utilize Tier 1, that actually kind of helps with the lower Tier 3 rate. But you could have somebody that perhaps is able to engage and wants to engage in a Zoom class, as an example, 1 day a week, but also still could really utilize that one-on-one individual services, and they're just really not ready to be in that group setting, or they're vulnerable and shouldn't be in a group setting. Then we want to make sure that we allow both those tiers can actually happen in the same week, but it cannot happen in the same week as Tier 3. Next slide, please. Okay, so the limits continued. So these are the proposed limits. I want to be clear, proposed limits based off of doing a lot of math and trying to figure out how to keep this budget neutral. Now keep in mind, we are not talking budget neutral for an individual client. We are talking budget neutral for all members. So it looks different than perhaps what you might see for your own potential member or yourself than it is what we have to look at for the entire, we have to look at it on an aggregate, which is everybody together. So Tier 1, the proposal would be a maximum of 15 hours or 60 units a week. Tier 2 is going to maintain the current weekly, monthly limits. And then Tier 3, this is the kicker, and believe me, we crunch so many numbers, but it would have to be, because of the increase in rate, the higher rate, it would be a maximum of 5 hours a week. So what we want to do is we want to, reach out to you all and get some ideas of what do you think about these rates? Are there any other ideas, such as using a dollar amount limit instead of a unit limit? Dollar amount gets really complicated from a budgeting perspective, but you guys are all wicked smart, and so I wanted to see if anybody has any great ideas. Can you go to the next slide, please? Okay, so here's what where we really want to open it up for discussion, and I know that there are a lot of comments in the chat box, so we will get to those. But wanted to pose some of these questions really quick, and then I'm going to turn it over to John to facilitate some discussion within the group. But, take a look. Are Tier 1 and Tier 3 proposed unit limits realistic? Is limiting a virtual service to 15 hours a week realistic? I want to point out, too, one of the things that is key with that is, CMS is actually, we're looking to keep telehealth services long-term, so post-pandemic. And one of the key factors there that CMS is telling us we have to consider is how are we going to implement a telehealth service for multiple services that would not isolate members from the community. So this goes back to the final settings rule. So one of the additional rationalizations for having a limit on the Tier 1, which would be the telehealth, would be with hopes that we would be able to demonstrate to CMS that because we have a limit, it is not going to inherently isolate members and they will never get out, never receive in-person services. So that's another caveat that I want to make sure folks are thinking about or realizing that we could hit a bump in the road if we don't have some realistic limitations on virtual services. Would a dollar limit be easier to implement? I really hesitate on that one because from a system-wide department aspect, I'm not sure that we could come up with a good dollar limit, but I certainly want to consider it if you all think, if you have some good ideas on how we could perhaps pursue that. What issues or obstacles do you see for providers in this multi-tiered approach? What impact is this going to have on the quality of the services that are provided? And does this proposal provide enough flexibility for both the providers and the members? So those are the questions I want everybody thinking about. John, I'm going to turn it over to you for facilitation. I think perhaps we start with the phone. There's a million questions in the chat box.
Sure. This is John Barry. Let me start with a real quick housekeeping about the comments. And as I've mentioned in other meetings, we're getting our act together about handling these virtual meetings. We want to hear from everyone who wants to talk to us. So I will be handling the speaker's queue for phone comments. As you know, we also have chat comments, which are perfectly welcome and great, and we will have some other staff or staff persons reading those. We're going to go back and forth probably. Regarding the phone comment, if you can, I will ask for names. Give me your name to get in the queue. I will collect those names, and then I will go through them. And the reason I do that is so that we can budget our time to know how many people want to make a phone comment. So if you can mention your name, not everyone knows everyone here, and your organization, if you would. And in terms of muting and unmuting, this system that we have, the phone number you dialed into, has *6 to mute and unmute. It may be that some of you have also placed your own phone on mute by pressing a mute button, in which case it'll be a two-step process for you. I would recommend that you perhaps don't use that. We will be muting callers and asking you to mute yourself after your comment. So let me start a whole bunch of questions here by collecting names to see if anyone would want to make a phone comment. Can I have names for the queue, please? Press *6 to unmute.
Bob Lawhead in the queue.
Thank you, Bob. Anyone else? Again, it's *6 to unmute your phone. If you have done your own muting on your end, you might want to press the mute button as well if you activated that. Well, so far we have one phone comment, and then Candace, I'll turn it over to you, Kira, after that. Bob, please go ahead.
Okay.
Good morning. Yeah, thanks for all the work on this. There are some issues that I brought up previously that I'm going to repeat because it just makes sense to me. Maybe it doesn't make sense to anyone else. But on the Tier 3 specifically, where we're talking about individualized services, as I've stated before and others agree, the cost to the provider for one-to-one services is the same. And dividing that out by tier level, it doesn't make any sense. These day services being divided out by tier level have never made sense to me. And in my mind, what you need to do here is to determine a one-to-one tier level similar to what you use for community connections in the CES waiver, so that you're paying the provider for that time spent. Now, I saw John went ahead and put in a comment about looking at the respite rate. That doesn't cover the cost, in my opinion. That's about $20 an hour, and that's not covering the cost for a one-to-one staff person. What covers the cost is closer to that rate for community connector, and I would advocate for that. Moving on, when it comes to it sounds like what's being suggested here is that we don't look at authorization, that we look at instead utilization. And I'm assuming what you mean by that is utilization during the COVID period here, where there's been no
Bob,
utilization?
Candace,
no?
I'm gonna jump in really quick. That is actually not the utilization we are looking at.
Okay, good.
I specifically have requested that we look at utilization pre-COVID time to make sure that we get a more accurate, and I appreciate you bringing that up because that is a really important distinction. That was my point exactly. I'm like, well, we can't look at it during the COVID time because nobody was going and everything was shut down, and that's just crazy. So I literally said that exact same thing. But no, I made very sure that we are looking at utilization pre-pandemic time, like as close to right before the pandemic started as we could, just so that it was a little bit more real time.
Sure. And, I certainly understand that. I guess, and if that's the route you want to go, I get it. But what I would suggest, and I think Jody chimed in with her comment on looking at converting these to dollars, and I know that that's more complex for HCPF, but if you can convert, if we have to use pre-COVID utilization as opposed to authorization, which I disagree with. I think it should be authorization computed on where we are in the year, so not the total annual authorization, but looking at a monthly authorization based on what's been authorized, taking that dollar amount and dividing those hourly rates that you finally set upon into that dollar amount so that we can get this to a level that's reasonable. In my mind, 5 hours a week for level 3 is really lowballing it. And I know there's a budget crisis, and I realize that we have to look at ways of dealing with that, but 5 hours a week is terribly limiting and is well below, in my opinion, I haven't run the numbers, but well below this concept of looking at authorization or utilization on a weekly basis and then dividing the rate into that to come to that hour amount. It just seems like this is really lowballed to me. And again, back in the old days, this is how we used to do it. We would look at the annual dollar amount and divide whatever hourly rate that we had developed to make sure we had individualized services into that amount. That makes sure that the provider is getting paid on the basis of that one-to-one hourly rate that allows them to do the service. These, I just can't imagine anybody doing a tier 3 one-to-one with these levels that you have based on the SIS. It doesn't even come close to the cost. Thanks.
Thanks, Bob. So, a few things to address there, and then I know that there are a ton of chat box comments and questions, and so I'm going to quickly go through some of the responses for you, Bob. I hear you. You don't feel that we should use utilization over authorization. Unfortunately, we don't have a choice. That is how the budget process works, and the only way that I can implement any change, period, is if I keep it budget neutral. And the only way to keep it budget neutral is to show that we are not going to spend more than what we have already spent. And spent means utilization. So this is like, if we want to be able to implement any sort of change like this, we're incredibly limited in how we do it.
So Candace, that's...
And that is, Candace, let me finish, Bob. Let me finish, Bob.
Okay.
Please.
All right.
Let me finish my thought. So I hear that is frustrating. Unfortunately, that is actually outside of the department's authority to do. So I cannot, nor can the department as a whole, make any actual changes that are going to have a fiscal impact. That would actually have to run through the Joint Budget Committee in the governor's office.
So just to be clear, the new budget figure that we're looking at is not what's been budgeted, it's what's been utilized. And
what
so
has been
the
budgeted
budget
is what has been utilized. That is how the budget is determined. That is how the budget has always been determined. It's based off of money that was spent. They usually work in a small amount of inflation into the number, but it is based off of what was spent, which was utilization.
And I guess I'm thinking of individualized budgets where people in the system are looking at their budgets and they have a certain authorization that they can go up to. And of course, every year there is some, with most people at least, there is some level of underutilization. And so I think, yeah, I'm sorry, I'm not going to get into the weeds on this, but I'll stop. It just doesn't feel right that people who have they have the authority to go ahead and spend now have had that authority removed. That those individualized budgets now cannot be, what's been authorized to be spent can now not be spent, is what I understand you're saying.
What I'm saying is if we make the change, we have to have different limitations. However, if we leave things as is, or members can continue to receive what has been authorized via the Tier 2, those services as usual in person, those have not changed.
It seems to me that we are extremely underutilized because of, I mean, I know we had retainer payments, which spent down a fair amount of money. But
it's not COVID-based. These numbers are not COVID-based. These numbers are utilization pre-COVID, and that is 100% where we base the numbers off of.
And so for individuals, they will not be able to, I'm sorry, John, just one more comment.
I've just been trying to, okay, thank you, Bob. Go ahead.
For individuals, for the people who are being served in this system, they will no longer have the option to utilize their individualized budgets.
No, that is not what I'm saying.
Through the end of this year.
Nope, that is not what I'm saying at all.
We do need to move forward now. We have 95 people on the call. And I hear you, Bob. I think we hear you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you, John.
Thanks a lot.
And hopefully, Bob, as we get through some more of these comments and questions, maybe it'll help make a little bit more of that clear.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Okay, so I think we're gonna have Kira read some of the chat questions here, and they are just racking up. So my apologies, everybody. Hopefully we will get to all of them. We'll do as many as we can, and I will respond to the questions as Kira is reading them.
All right, can you hear me?
Yes, thank you, Kira.
Okay, so John Klaus asked, if the service is meant to be one-to-one, why would it be split in SIS tiers? The cost of providing a one-on-one service is the same regardless of SIS level. Wouldn't a model like the SLS respite rate make more sense? And that rate is $5.64.
Thanks, John. And, this is right in line with what Bob was just saying as well. And, that is actually the model and what we were looking at for SCC, so spoiler alert. And I hear you, and, we can certainly take that back and maybe reevaluate that Tier 3 to be an individualized rate. I have no issues with taking that back to take a look at it at all, if that makes more sense.
Okay, and then Kendra McManus, again, you had asked if the 3-tier structure was already in place or if it's still being discussed, and we just wanted to reiterate that this is all just proposed at this point. It is not final in any way, shape, or form. Jenna Riley then said, oh my goodness, it takes at least 2 hours to prepare some of our Zoom classes, such as cooking and art, so we can make sure participants have supplies. None of that is billable, so we are working for free to provide services. Dropping rates for telehealth will hurt us even more. Kendra McManus said, I agree with Jenna, not to mention we still need to pay all of our overheads, such as rent. Jenna then responded, seriously, I'm purchasing supplies with my own money just to keep going. Candace, did you want to respond to any of that?
Yeah, and and I hear you, and I hear the time that it is taking to prepare for these classes, and based off of the information that we have, so we have a pretty solid set rate methodology that we use to determine our rates. Essentially, we have factors that we plug in that include, costs for staff salaries, overhead costs for building space. It even includes things all the way down to cable and internet, that type of stuff. And so, based off of the information that we have with those factors, that is what we have come up with. So if there is something that we are missing from those factors, please send that to us so that we can make sure that we have everything in place. Keep in mind that we are, the majority of our rates have what is called a budget neutrality factor applied to them. So it is not, because we only have a certain amount of money, we only have a certain appropriation for rates, we actually have to kind of back into that money, essentially. And so what our rates division does is they actually have to apply what is called a budget neutrality factor. So let's say traditionally a service is funded at $10 an hour, fully funded, but we only have $8 an hour to pay, then we would have to apply a budget neutrality factor to get it down to that $8, and that is just the nature of how the appropriations work and how we are funded from the Joint Budget Committee. And that applies to all HCBS services across the board. They all have a variety of budget neutrality factors applied to them. So there's that factor. Jenna, one of the things that I'm hoping with these Zoom classes is as we get into get used to doing these classes, that we'll actually get more into like a rhythm, and that it will, as you perform them and do them more often, that they will take less time to prepare. That's obviously not going to be true for necessarily every single type, but for those that you do on a regular basis, let's say you offer, I don't know, an exercise Zoom class 2 days a week. Once you have a schedule and you have a rhythm down, it will take less time to actually prepare for that, hopefully. And so those are some of the things that I'm really hopeful for. But again, if there are specific things that we're missing with factors, if you can actually list out all the factors that go into the cost and you want to send that to us, we 100% would like to look at that. Go ahead, Kira.
Okay, three more comments that are on the similar topic. So Doug McNeil said remote rates should not be lower because our costs of providing the service have not dropped. Tim Cortez said we have also invested heavily in building up a very robust virtual program in order to stay financially viable during this time. Dropping those rates will impact us significantly. Jennifer Risdell says the cost of doing all of these modified services is higher, yet rates are being decreased. And then Kendra McManus said, so clients can attend on-site services as well as online.
So again, to all of those that had the rates comments, if you want to send us all of your factors that go into and the cost that you have, we would certainly like to see that so that we can make sure that we are plugging in all of the correct factors into our rate methodology. And then Kendra, so clients could do on-site services. So they could do Tier 1, which is virtual, and Tier 3, which is the one-on-one in the same week. They could not do the on-site, like facility-based in the same week, but they could in the same month.
All right, Tom Turner, I have raised this question numerous times. Given current utilization rates, there must be huge revisions, so cost neutrality should not be an issue.
Yeah, I hear you, Tom. Unfortunately, it is, and it is something that as part of all the budgeting and forecasting, all of those underutilization numbers were actually utilized for the statewide. So that was a Joint Budget Committee decision, and those are not factors that we can actually consider and use. To keep in mind, that would also be temporary. And so what we're looking to do is, while we want to roll this out for during pandemic time, we also want to come up with a flexible idea and option that we could maintain long term.
Kendra McManus again, we have had to cut the time we are on site due to numbers. Tim Cortez, we have many individuals who are meeting services through a combination of virtual and small group in-person classes. This would be a huge burden on them. Christy Broughton,
okay.
The limitation.
Sorry, go ahead.
This is kind of similar. Chrissy Broughton, the limitation on Tier 2 provided in the same week as Tiers 1 and 3 seems odd. What is the rationale and justification for that?
Yeah, so the reason for that is solely based off of the rates, and because the Tier 3 rate is so high, we are looking at how do we keep the amount spent within the current amount spent. And because Tier 2 is the current as-is services, essentially you would look at that as that would be what we would spend normally, and adding anything to that would take us over. So Tier 1 or 2 adding to that would take us over. We have no way to, without imposing additional limits on Tier 2, we have no way to keep that down. So that's the justification and rationale for that.
John Kloss asks, can you clarify what you mean by Tier 2 maintains current weekly, monthly limits? There's only an annual limit, so is there a new weekly, monthly limit?
No, so thank you, John. So essentially what we do is we look at average utilization in a week. So for the most part, when folks are talking day programming, they schedule that out. They're going to go Monday, Wednesday, Friday for 5 hours a day. And so there's traditionally a schedule. Providers need a schedule so that they can have staff available, things like that. So, you know, it's something that is, while it is an annual allocation, it is built off of what is utilized on the weekly, and that's usually based on a schedule. I mean, that's how service planning generally works. So,
Okay,
here, I'm going to go to the next one really quick because I just read that Christina says you feel like this has lost all the person-centered focus. I'd like to understand that better. You know, that was certainly not the goal. The goal is to add flexibility. And you know, when we first proposed this, these options, these 3-tiered options to you all 2 weeks ago, maybe, I don't know, I've lost track of time. Everybody felt like this was pretty person-centered, and so I'm interested in how having rates changes that. So I want to understand where we lost the person-centered focus so that we can hopefully get it back to that, Christina.
Okay, and then Jody Walters asked, if the weekly limit was a dollar amount, could all 3 services occur in the same week?
Maybe. I don't know. The dollar amount is hard because everybody utilizes a different amount of services, and putting a dollar amount on for all 3 tiers together, we can look at it and see what it does and see if it's feasible. My other concern is I'm not sure the system can handle that, but we can look at that and see.
Kendra McManus, can you please explain why we need to change these rates just because we are using telehealth?
Because the factors change when you're using telehealth. And so, you know, one of the factors is you're no longer having travel, having the face-to-face in-person. Traditionally, you utilize or would need less actual physical space to do, because you're not having people in-house at a facility. So you don't, rather than having a space for 50 people, you need a space for a couple of staff. So the actual square footage traditionally could go down. But again, you know, these are all factors that are plugged in to a rate methodology, and if there are things that we missed, please let us know. You know, our rate staff take a lot of pride in making sure that they gather feedback and have the appropriate factors included in the methodology. So this is one of the keys as to why we were very clear that these are not final rates, because we want to make sure that we get it right.
Okay, another few comments. Jenna Riley, this is not very person-centered. Almost all of our participants with our programs would lose services because they do a combination of various services during the week. Roxanne wanted us to answer Tom Turner's questions, which I believe we have. Kim Cortez, I agree with Jenna in loss of services for most, if not all of our clients. CVRC, it seems as though the cost of virtual supports is the same no matter the person's support level. Couldn't cost neutrality be examined if there was one rate for virtual services for all levels? Support levels are based on support and supervision needs, which don't come into play in a virtual setting. Providing virtual supports to a level 1 is no different than providing supports to a level 6 in a virtual environment. One mid-range rate would help with cost neutrality and with the complexities of budgeting.
Now that's a really good point, and I think that's something that we certainly could take back and take a look at. I would be interested to see if other providers agree with that. So what I've heard so far, and again, I realize that there are a lot of chat comments that we haven't gone through yet and I haven't read, but what I've heard is 2 points: that it essentially costs the provider the same to provide whether it's one-on-one services or virtual services, and so that it might be better to have one singular rate for each of those. And that's a great idea, and that's one of the reasons why we are so thankful for your input, so we can take that one back as well.
Christina then commented, there was such great hope that this pandemic was going to help us reimagine day programming. People are going to finally have the opportunity to truly have a self-directed approach to a service that is not designed to be person-centered. Jennifer Biggs, what is the reason for not being able to do Tier 2 and Tier 1 services in the same week? I believe we have answered that question. Kim Cortez, we also have significant concerns about the back-end administration implementation of all these changes on such a tight turnaround in order to actually bill for services. Working on getting a more specific question from our admin team.
Okay. Yeah, once you get a more specific question, Kim, that we would like to better understand that.
Is the small group rate for Spec Hab and SEC off the table, or is that still being considered?
Thanks, Ellen. So the Tier 2 is the small group rate, is the group rate. As far as adding a fourth one, that because we are trying to get this rolled out quickly and right now, that is not something that we are working on in the moment, because we want to get the rest of this rolled out, or at least attempt to.
And then we have a couple of comments agreeing with a single amount for a one-on-one.
Okay.
And then a couple of agreements about a dollar amount limit. And then another about a agreement with the single one-on-one rate. Christine, has TICBUF been advised of what the cost of running a PASA is? Liability insurance, workman's comp, vehicle insurance and operations, employee wages, PTO insurance, etc.
So those are all factors, Christine, that we take into building our rate methodology. So yes. But again, if there is something specific that you feel like we are missing, if you want to outline all of those costs for us, our rates department is always happy to take that in and take a look and see if what they missed for the rate methodology.
Again, a few more comments in support of a dollar limit.
Okay.
Madeline Langren, each person already has an annual allocation budgeted, so I do not understand how using their annual SPAL amount with increased flexibility would not be budget neutral.
Because again, the majority of individuals actually utilize under their SPAL limit, and therefore we can't use the actual SPAL dollar limit, because that's not what has been budgeted. We have to budget off of actual utilization, not authorization.
Another person agreeing with Bob about rates. Lori, the cost of one-on-one services, even in a level 6, there's no way to afford rent, staffing, etc.
Thank you for your comment, Lori.
Are we planning for these rates to go into effect prior to the end of the public health emergency, or is this post-pandemic?
Well, my hope is to get this up and running before the public health emergency ends, and then continue post-pandemic. That's the hope. Oh, Jody asked to speak, but no, we didn't hear you, Jody. I'm sorry.
Can I quickly talk?
Yep. Oh, there you are. Yes.
Oh, hooray. Okay, so wow, this is a lot. I really appreciate all of the thought that the department has put into this. I think some of the overall shock is the overall limits in place maybe are feeling like they're not actually going to provide a lot of flexibility for providers. And I'm wondering, Candace, I completely understand that this has to, no choice other than to stay budget neutral. But I think part of the issue is that when an individual service plan is planned, and I think there's the intention of going, attending those services that full time, and then life happens and people aren't able to attend, that gap between utilization and what is allowable, right, is a real thing that happens in people's lives. They get sick, you know, they go on vacation, so on and so forth. And so I think to then ratchet that down to making a new cap with this based upon 100% utilization is going to have an extreme ratcheting effect, if that makes sense, because you almost have to over-plan utilization in order to hit 100%, if that makes sense, right? Because if you just took your average week, there's vacations and illnesses and sicknesses and, you know, so on and so forth. So a concern with this is that if we're basing this off of just what has currently been utilized, we've got like a little Tabor effect going here. And so, you know, I wonder if that dollar limit provides for some more flexibility. And I understand the difficulty of that, but does that make sense what I'm attempting to?
Yeah, I think the one thing I want to point out is that the dollar limit would also be tied directly to utilization. So it would be current average utilization per week for the services. So it would also be tied directly to utilization.
So I understand that. I guess what I'm wondering, if there is such a drastic difference between utilization and what is authorized, how does that not put us back into kind of this feedback loop with reversions, right? I understand if it's pre-COVID, and I think I grasp what you're saying, and I understand the need to not overspend, but even as we were billing retainer payments, we were billing kind of what people's average week looked like, not their past year utilization, if that makes sense.
I don't have a great answer for you on that. What I can tell you is, you know, the budget is based off of how much we spent the previous year, and we have to stay within those, or we can't make any changes. And so I guess, you know, I'm hearing a lot of not positive feedback, if you will, about this approach and these limitations, you know, and so one of the things to keep in mind is we don't have to move forward with these changes. We don't have to if folks don't think it makes sense because of the limitations that we would have to impose. You know, we can look to see if doing the singular rate for both the level 1 and level 3 make any difference. I would be shocked if it did, but our hands are fairly tied on the approach and how we can move this forward. I understand it's highly frustrating for each and every one of you, but I don't have a magic wand, and I don't have any other way to make it better.
This is John Barry. I wonder if we have any other folks who want to get in the queue to make a comment by phone. I would take your name. You can press *6 to unmute.
So I want to make sure, so this is
John,
sorry, real quick before we jump to the next, I heard you, John, before we jump to the next phone comment here. I want to just point out that we have a whole other section of the presentation around SCC that I want to make sure we have time to get to. We still have another hour and 10 minutes, but I just want to make sure folks are aware that there is more information that I would love to present to you all if I'm allowed.
Okay, thanks, Candace. I didn't hear anyone before. Just one more time, more quickly. Is there anyone who would like to make a comment by phone? You can press *6 to unmute.
Bob in the queue.
Thank you, Bob. Anyone else?
John Klaus for the queue.
John, thank you. Anyone else there for the phone? Okay, mindful of what Candace just said, I guess other parts of the agenda need some time and attention. Bob, please go ahead.
I just want HCPF to realize that we really appreciate the flexibility that you described in the last meeting and that you're following through with here. The negative reaction is around the rates and the way, in my mind at least, the way you're proposing the Tier 3 payments. So wonderful job, you guys, in trying to figure out a way to allow members to utilize day program using some very creative payment techniques. But the concern here is Tier 3 just needs to be expanded as far as number of hours available to people on a weekly basis, and at the same time, rates need to be increased so that providers are breaking even. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Bob. John Klaus, please go ahead.
Just wanted to point out that I don't know about the rates or the tier levels across the state, but in our agency, 60% of the people we support are level 1 or level 2. And at the tier level 3 rates that are proposed, there is simply no way we could offer that service to the tier level 1s and 2s without sustaining huge financial losses. And so those probably would not get implemented. And I just repeat kind of what Bob said. Very excited about the proposal in concept. It's a wonderful idea, very creative. We just need to work on making it within the limits you folks have to deal with, something that we can actually implement to help people. Thank you.
Thank you, John.
Thank
that
you,
information is really helpful as far as your provider agency being able to implement. Sorry, John.
No, I was just going to ask a question to you, Candace. So we've gotten a lot of feedback at this point. Might you want to move forward or continue on?
I think what I want to do is I'm going to scan some of these chat box comments and questions, Kira, if that's okay. I'll just read some of the ones that I want to highlight, not because all of them are not important. I just, for the sake of time, want to make sure that anything that is new that hasn't been brought up or discussed, that we have an opportunity to discuss it or questions to be answered, and then we can move on to the next one. So, you know, I hear that there's concerns around the rates. Tara asked a really great question around switching between the tiers, and that is something that we would have to work out and figure out how easy. I don't think a new IDD would be necessary because that would be cumbersome. But there would be required a PAR change, so we can kind of work through and maybe come up with some creative solutions on how we can make it easier for providers and members to switch between tiers if necessary. I hear Doug is concerned about the Denver minimum wage. You know, we received the authority from the Joint Budget Committee in Colorado General Assembly to increase some rates for the Denver area, and so outside of that, we have no authority to increase those rates. Okay, and then guidance around who can access. So we can't limit any of the tiers to any individual. That is actually not what we're looking to do. We're looking for members to be able to receive services in a way that makes the most sense for them and is best for their lives. And so while I hear you that you said most people prefer one-on-one services, what I have heard during this pandemic, very loud and very clear, is that there are actually a lot of members that really, really miss the group setting. And so I would say that there are a very large number of folks that enjoy getting together with their peers, enjoy getting out of the house and doing things with a group of people. And so I think that there will still be a lot of individuals that utilize the group setting as well. Okay, so lots about billing. Tom will take that back. Let's see here. Current methodology. Was the current rate methodology referenced used to develop the current DP rates? I'm not sure what you mean by DP, Rob, but the current methodology that we referenced was used to develop all of our rates. So let's see here. Yes, I see that the not doing it at the same level is difficult. Most limiting factor is the ability to serve the community-based SCC services. So we're going to, transportation. I hear you, but again, as I have stated every single week on all these webinars, this virus is highly, highly contagious and highly dangerous, and we know it is passed in the air. And having a number of individuals in close proximity in a closed environment is incredibly dangerous. And so at this point in time, we are not revising our limitations to the non-medical transportation service. Let's see here. There's lots of concern about not having it in the same way or the same week. Lots of agreement with each other, which is great. Education concerns. Rates. Okay. Sorry, I'm just going through. I would just really want to make sure I hit on all of anything that's new that we haven't had a chance to talk about. Please keep in mind that all of these comments are being recorded, so we will take every single one of these back to really make sure that we take a deep dive and see what you all have said. So if I'm skipping over any of the comments, it's not because we don't want to hear you, and we are actually taking every single one of these down. Okay, more concerns about revisions. So it might be helpful, so Christy brings up, it might be helpful for actual figures and utilization and reversions. So I don't have reversion information. So it's that information I don't have. Utilization, what we looked at from fiscal year 18-19 was the average weekly utilization for specialized habilitation was 9.5 hours per member. Okay, so yeah. All right, so I am going to move on because all of these comments are highly important. However, we have had a chance to at least touch on the idea and the topic of them. And so for the sake of time, I would like us to move on to our next topic, if we could, which is the proposed 3 tiers for SCC. During the last meeting on September 10th, we discussed the proposal for the 3-tiered system for specialized habilitation only. We heard you, stakeholders provided a lot of feedback saying that you also felt like this approach for SCC would be highly desirable and a really great option as well. So we took that back and are bringing back the exact same proposal for SCC. So essentially, Tier 1 would be virtual only. This one is a little bit harder because, the point of the Supported Community Connector is to actually connect a member to their community. And I'm hesitant and concerned about allowing Tier 1 post-pandemic for any substantial amount of time. And so that's something I really want to put on the table, that the point and the definition of the service is to help members connect to their community. And I want to see some really good demonstrations, or at least some limitations on how we could do that really well virtually. Tier 2 is the exact same as far as how we propose the spec hab. Tier 2 is that it's the current practice and the current rate, that all requirements would have to be met, which means that the service would have to be provided out in the community. I just want to point out that the members legally responsible persons are host home provider. that may be temporarily providing the SEC, which was part of a temporary allowance in response to COVID. So I want to be clear that that is temporary. So those members that would fall under the Tier 2 rate. If you have more questions about those temporary allowances, there's the links to the memos there. Next slide, please. And then Tier 3, again, would be the one-on-one in-person service. We heard you mention Community Connector many times during the last meeting, and so that actually was the approach that we were looking at, is having just one solid rate instead of having it broken out by SIS level. I'm hearing that folks would prefer that for specialized habilitation as well, so we will certainly take that back. The service would be entirely individual and would be utilizing their community as a learning environment. And again, because of the higher rate, it would have to have a lower weekly maximum for the number of billable hours, which would be based off of utilization, just like specialized habilitation. And we don't have those numbers at this point in time, but just as a heads up to you all, that is what we are looking at and working with. Next slide, please. So proposed limits for the 3-tier SEC, similar to what we proposed for specialized habilitation. We're still working on those rates, so I don't have those to present today, which, I don't know, maybe be a sigh of relief for you all, I'm not sure. But the Tier 1 is, will be similar to the Tier 1 specialized habilitation rates. But I'm rethinking that perhaps maybe we look at that as a singular rate as well, just like the Tier 3 as proposed earlier. The Tier 2, those rates would remain the same. There would be no change there. And then the Tier 3 would be closer to the Community Connector rate, the singular rate. Again, Tier 1 and 3 could be combined in the same week. Tier 3 would have a much lower unit limit in order for it to remain budget neutral. And then Tier 2 would not be provided in the same week as Tier 1 or 3. Again, taking that back as far as maybe we look at an overall dollar amount versus a unit limit. Next slide, please. Okay, so feedback. So this is where, switching gears, not specialized habilitation, but supported community connector. Remember, while they both fall under the day habilitation umbrella, they are two distinct and separate services that have two different definitions and purposes for members. So what issues or obstacles do you see for providers utilizing this tiered structure? What impact do you think that this could have on the quality of SEC services provided? Specifically, I would love to hear what folks think about the Tier 1 virtually ongoing post-pandemic. Bob, I have heard you and from the last meeting and your significant concerns around essentially keeping folks out of the community. And so I just wanted to make note of that I certainly heard you and also have those concerns because the intent of the service, the definition of the service is to connect members to their community. So how could we realistically do that on an ongoing basis post-pandemic? And then, the other questions here to look at and consider is, does this provide enough flexibility for providers and members? What other changes should be made? And are those limits realistic? I'm going to take a wild guess there that the answer is going to be no. So at this point, I'd like to jump back over to the chat box here and see. I see we have a few questions. I'm just going to, because I like the all caps light bulb, I'm going to read that one if that's okay because it looks exciting. Lots of individuals have a mix of SCC and SpecHab, yes. Where some only attend SpecHab, can those limits be looked at based on a mix of total day services, so higher for individuals that only attend SpecHab and lower for a blend? We can take a look at that, Jody. Again, it gets really complicated because exactly of that, the mix. And so we can take a look at that. What we can't, so what we can't do, Jody, is say everybody gets this dollar amount based off of this average in any way that it would allow the potential for higher utilization in one or the other, if that makes sense.
No, I 100% understand that. I've just been sitting here racking my brain as far as why is the one-on-one rate so low And of course, if you're looking at this across all total utilization, we're looking at people who only attend SPACAB all week, and we're also mixing that in with people who are attending maybe, one day a week. And so that 9 hours a week is, I think, an incomplete picture. So where this 5-hour a week one-on-one limit would be extraordinarily limiting for the person who attends 24, right, who attends all 5 days a week, it could actually be really positive for somebody who's got a blend. And so just making sure we're taking that into account, right, so that we don't have, and I think that might be the piece where people are responding to it doesn't feel person-centered, right? At least that's a hypothesis on my side. I better understand why that is so low now, but it isn't totally equitable on a per person sort of setting, which I know is not the intent, and I know that there are so many complexities that this is a hell of a jigsaw puzzle you guys are putting together. So I really appreciate the thought process. And I think what you're also getting from the chat box is all of state providers are getting a little desperate. And so for this not to feel like, the single shot, oh my God, we got it. I think people are feeling a little desperate is my.
Yeah. Fair, and I appreciate that, Jody. And yes, so I think that's a really great point. Is we are looking at anybody that uses specialized facilitation, and we have a number of folks that perhaps use less, and that did go into the average. I think to your point that it doesn't feel equitable to each individual, you're right, because we can't do it on an individual basis. We can't set limitations or anything on an individual basis. We just don't have the ability or the manpower capacity to do that. We had to look at it on an aggregate, but perhaps what we do is we figure out a way, albeit I'm not sure I love the idea, and I'll tell you why, of having an overall limit for all of DayHab and not just SpecHab. And the reason why I don't love that is because I have seen a lot, especially here lately, of a number of advocates, members, providers, what have you, a whole list of folks that feel that SpecHab and SCC are interchangeable, and they're just not. They're different services that have different definitions and different purposes. And so I really hesitate about having one overarching limitation for the umbrella, because I feel like that might encourage more of that thought process that it might be those services are interchangeable with each other, because they're just not. What would have made this a whole lot easier is if we had limitations for each individual service instead of having 7 different services under one bucket. That has been what's been really hard, and I will tell you, maybe one of the projects that I'm like, maybe we need to look at how those are bucketed together for the future state when we're not in a pandemic. But I think perhaps what we do is we take a look at an option to see if it would be feasible of maybe a dollar limit across all of DayHab. I think it's at least worth looking into. Okay, so just going through, because there aren't quite as many chat box questions coming in right now, so maybe I need to go back and read the other ones. But Kim Cortez mentioned, that's a great point, could Tier 2 SCC be provided in the same week as Tier 1 SpecHab or vice versa? Yes, we don't have any limitations on that at this point in time. Yes, and so that's the same question Jennifer had. Well, John mentions, while dollar limits instead of unit limits may be more work, giving a dollar limit for day services would seem to be the most person-centered approach, giving the individual the highest amount of flexibility. So, John, I just want to be clear. It's not necessarily that we're worried about having to do the work. If I was convinced that dollar limits was going to be the best way to go, 100%, ton of staff hours, and we would certainly dive into that. I'm not convinced. The reason why I'm hesitant is I'm not sure that our system is capable of it. So I don't want to say, yes, we can switch to dollar limits because it'll be better, if we can't actually implement it. And there are a ton of factors as to why I say that, why I'm hesitant, and it is all system-based. And, you know, everything has to be prior authorized and all that. That makes it very complicated. So it is not about the amount of work. It's about making sure that we actually could implement it if that is the way we were to go. So I see Jody likes the idea of dollar limits across all of DayHab. And Christy said true. Let's see here. John, while the services are separate, projecting out 52 weeks, what a person is going to want to do is an impractical system. Someone is scheduled for SEC, but yes. So I hear you. Yeah, I mean, this is the predicament that we have as far as having a system that everything has to be prior authorized, and that is part of our federal system. So that is a federal requirement that services are prior authorized, and that certifications are span for a year. And so yes, it's difficult to plan for 52 weeks. That is the nature of the system that we have, and so we have to work within those constraints, as hard as it is and as frustrating and infuriating as it can be. 100% agree. Tom, more of a big picture question. You said, so you're talking to me, obviously. You said earlier that you're trying to build a rate structure that works in the future. Where do you see all this intersecting with the work on individualized budgets? Oh, Tom, that is a great question. So as many of you are aware, we are working on a person-centered budget process right now for individualized budgets, and I don't have an answer for that. However, what I will tell you is that this would fit right into that, because the person-centered budgets are going to take into account the needs and the services and the current rates, and well, not necessarily just current rates, but the rates for those services. So there's a formula that's built, so this wouldn't affect those budgets in a negative way, if that's kind of more of the bigger question. John, do you want to open it up and see if there's any phone questions?
Very well, Candace. This is John Barry. So if you have a comment you'd like to make by phone, please give me your name for the queue. You can press *6 to unmute. Any names for the queue? If you have your phone muted as well as the system *6, you might, if you're having trouble, you might check your phone to see if you've muted it with your mute button, but it's press *6 to unmute. Hearing none for the moment. Candace?
All right, well then I will go back to the chat box here, because I did see another question came in. Real quick before I get to Christine's question, is I just want to put out there again for folks to be thinking about, and hopefully you can respond, is really want to think about the impact of the quality of service. So how do folks think the tier 1, so virtual service, long-term, meaning post-pandemic, would work, or would it work for SDC? So Christine's comment is, why no financial support for a group of 2 to have SCC? Too low of this level makes it impossible to open back up for SCC and bring back employees at this time. The rates do not cover the costs. I'm not entirely sure what you mean by no financial support for a group of 2 because of minivan limitations. Is that so? Non-medical transportation services actually cannot be billed at the same time as SCC, never have been. So I'm not entirely clear what you mean on that, Christine. I'm sorry. If you want to help me understand, that would be great. John mentions, while you have a lot of questions and some critical feedback, I would agree. I just want to, critical meaning important is the way I took that. I want to express again how much we appreciate you sharing all of this and thinking of creative ideas to the system of service delivery for it. Thanks, John. I appreciate that. And it's important to get the feedback, and it's important for us to realize where it might work or not work. And so I appreciate you all being willing to speak up. Christine wants to place more clients in our vehicles for SCC if we aren't billing NMT at this time. I just, no. Again, it's just not safe. It's having people in close proximity in a closed environment is incredibly unsafe. That is something that has been proven and mentioned and talked about, which is why indoor limitations still exist across the country. It's because it's just not safe to have that many people that close together. And then let's see here, T. Wilson from Dungarvan, the most limiting factor that hampers our ability to serve the community based on SCC is the transportation. So I hear you, the transportation is difficult, and this is why one of the reasons why we're proposing this three-tiered structure, having the option to have a one-on-one service for members, having the option to be able to provide multiple telehealth options for these members to a group of people. Keep in mind telehealth isn't necessarily one-on-one. It can be provided to a group at the same time. So that is the hope, because we do realize that these limitations still exist. Because this virus still exists. We are in the middle of, getting ready for a second surge. Like, things aren't better right now, and we cannot let down our guard, and we cannot stop with our precautions. Otherwise, we are going to be in a much worse situation than we already are. So let's see here. So Jennifer understands the reasoning for the limitation to the vehicle capacities with this tiered structure. We'll need to provide SCC in the community fully again, but we only have 2 people in a minivan. I hear that. Yes, and keep in mind that we're hopeful that this tiered structure actually would be sustainable and we could keep it long term, so post-pandemic as well. Let's see here. Small group option is different than the current rate. Small group equals 2 to 3, not 5 to 8. So we don't actually have limitations on the smaller group right now for SCC. So perhaps Jody, you and I should talk offline so I can better understand how it's currently implemented. Let's see here. So running through, Jenna, appreciate all the effort. Hope that you strongly consider figuring out how to allow Tier 1 and Tier 2 in the same week. We've been working very hard to provide person-centered services, and we have a wonderful blend of Zoom and in-person services. We have participants who join a morning Zoom and then a group in the afternoon. This pandemic has been very difficult on many of our participants and our providers, I will add, and many of us have figured out creative person-centered services. It's hurting us financially, so limiting it even more will make it more difficult. So I appreciate that, Jenna. I appreciate the creativity that your agency has brought to the table to ensure that members are receiving services in the best way possible. And, you have my commitment that we will take this back and take a look to see if there's a better way that we can ensure budget neutrality and allowing for some flexibility. But Bob writes, SCC should be provided one-on-one to keep members safe. We cannot put members at risk. Okay, so thank you, Bob, for that one. Madeline, the transportation limitations then limit the number of people you have to provide service to at your final destination. Yeah, you're right, it does. And I'm not going to sugarcoat it and say that, it'll be fine and you guys can figure it out. It's hard. And, one of the ideas that we have come up with is, having transportation and so having somebody at a location for the community services and having, multiple vehicles bringing members or staggering times and have as to when members arrive and leave. There's some ideas perhaps, but it is limiting and it is hard. Let's see here, Jody, there's no limitation, but the larger numbers are due to the break-even point. Okay, I hear you. Jody's comment about small group size is critical to address. So what I'm hearing is that folks are wanting a 4th option, so a 4-tiered structure for SCC. I have concerns about the probability of being able to roll something like that out in any sort of reasonable timeline. Let's see here. Tom mentioned
Ellen.
data.
Can I be in the queue?
Yes, Ellen, of course. I'm going to read Tom's question real quick
you.
and then I'll get to yours.
Go for it.
Tom, I have data on the time spent. If anyone from your department wants to have a conversation about how it looks at the ground level for us, I'm willing to have an offline conversation that provided a more complete picture of process staffing costs. Tom, we would love data. Data is always our friend, and so if you would like to share or willing to share, we would certainly take you up on that. All right, I'm going to play John, and I'm going to go ahead and call in Ellen for the queue, mostly because John can't get a word in edgewise.
Thanks, Candace. So it's obvious that this is just a very complicated issue, and I want to, second everyone's comments about how appreciative we are to the department for, looking at restructuring this whole thing. We know it's a really heavy lift. It sounds like there's, a lot more feedback for you guys to take into consideration, and I know this was the last of the DayHab stakeholder meetings anyway. So I just want to get a sense of, first of all, I guess, could you remind us when the end of the public health emergency is likely to be? I was remembering early next year, but I want to double check that. So in terms of, you said you want to hope to roll the stuff out by the end of the public health emergency, it would help me to have a reminder of what that date might be. And then if you could provide a sense of what the department's approach is going to be to taking all of this additional feedback and the potential for future additional stakeholder work on this, I think that would be really helpful.
Sure. So the official public health emergency, the PHE, actually ends on October 26th. So that has not been extended as of the last information I had by the administration, the federal administration. So the formal public health administration or public health emergency. We have what is called an Appendix K to our waivers, which was our ability and CMS's opportunity to give us the ability, all states the ability to make changes and amendments and allowances and tweaks, if you will, to each of the waivers based off of a national emergency. We actually have authority for our Appendix K, which includes these type of changes, to operate through March 10th, I believe is the formal date. That is the latest possible date that CMS will allow us to extend it out to. There's obviously all sorts of talks as to whether or not CMS will change that, because turns out the Appendix K wasn't written with a pandemic in mind, because nothing was written with a pandemic in mind. So who knows what will happen with that. But as of right now, March 10th, we would like to incorporate a number of changes into our next round of waiver, well, not next round, actually. We would like to create waiver amendments so that we can incorporate these for long term, which would mean we would have to have approval from CMS by March 10th in order to not have a gap between rolling this out, having to stop it, and then being able to start it again, so that it could be seamless. That means CMS would have to have a 90-day clock in order to review any proposed changes. So we are up against the wall right now. We would have to have everything turned around and out for public notice by essentially the end of this month. So that's kind of a rough timeline, if that helps. As far as additional stakeholder meetings around these potential changes, I don't have an answer yet because there's a lot that just came at me today. I was really hopeful that, while not ideal, folks would be like, I get it, the budget isn't great, you're doing an awesome job. I'm just kidding. But I hear you all that this isn't quite where we need it to be, and so I'm hesitant to say that we will host another stakeholder meeting. I'm just not sure we have the time to provide you all enough notice to be able to participate. But we'll figure out some way. I just don't know that right now, Ellen.
Okay, thank you. That's helpful. I mean, it does, I know, I agree with you. It feels like there's a lot sort of unfinished with this conversation, and if there's anything that we at Alliance can do to help facilitate further in-depth discussion, we're happy to
I just need to think about the timeline, because really that's because CMS has to have a full 90 days in order to review our amendments, we have to have a full 30 days of public noticing, which means we don't make changes outside of, based off of public comment or outside of, smaller grammatical changes. We can't make any real major substantial changes during public comment period. That's 4 months of time that we have to have it untouched, essentially. And so we have to have the work completed, like done, ready to go, like at least 4 months prior to the Appendix K end date, which turns out is fairly soon.
Yeah.
So
okay, thanks, Candace. We'll keep noodling.
If you guys have any ideas, I'd love to hear them on stakeholder engagement and how we can work through this. It sounds like Kira, Cassie, and I, if you need us on something else, I'm sorry, we're busy. We're doing this. So I don't have an answer for that, but we'll figure something out.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Ellen. I appreciate the comments and the questions. All right, so I'm going to go back to the chat box here. It looks like I missed a lot, so I got to scroll up. Sorry. Here we go. Let's see here. Lori, too, also has data. Lori, if you want to send that to us as well, there will be an email at the end of this presentation here that you all can use for sending some data and some information. Amy is agreeing with Jenna that we need a blended approach. Cindy mentioned that a dollar-based and each person can choose might work. Lots of agreement there. Tara is reminding me that we aren't out of the woods with this virus. Exactly my point earlier around NMT. The overarching question is whether this is a system that forces or encourages providers to take unnecessary risks in order to stay viable, which is exactly what we are trying to avoid. And so if you have, at the same time, this isn't just the virus that we're dealing with. This isn't just the pandemic and, the risk to people's health. We are also dealing with an actual incredibly difficult financial situation as well. They're likening it to the Great Depression. And so we are dealing with a multi-pronged, devastating situation right now that we have to balance between the two, which is really hard. So I hear you all on all of that. Let's see here. The community is using virtual services in general to help connect with people.
Please hold while I confirm your passcode. Thank you. Your passcode is confirmed. When you hear the tone, you will be the 20th person to join the meeting.
Okay, sorry. I was being told that I needed to stop for a second, but now I'm good. Okay, sorry. So Sarah, changing the tier 3 to a 1 to 3 would actually change the structure of the rate. And we can look at that, but I don't know exactly. I'd have to talk to our rate staff as far as what that would do to the actual rate itself. And maybe that's something that we look at when we're looking to do a singular rate versus this level rate. So maybe we can kind of take a look and see what that would do. Okay, so Bob, the proposed new tier 3 close to the CS Community Connect rate will be essential in allowing access to safe, inclusive, person-centered, and sustainable day services. Thank you, Bob. So those are the end of those comments for right now. Let's go to the next slide, please. I'm going to move us along. I know we still have about 30 minutes, but I kind of think we've run through the major topics, and we've heard that we need to kind of relook at things a little bit. So next up, so here's the email inbox that if you have some ideas, please send them to us. If you have data on what it takes to provide these services, including factors and actual numbers and things like that, please send that to us via this inbox. You can just put a heading of 4-day programming changes, whatever. It'll get routed to Kira and myself. Just please send us information. We really, really appreciate it. So this also says that we're going to publish some operational memos. However, we're nowhere near, obviously, the being prepared for those operational memos. I need to take back and discuss with my team on how we are going to move forward with potentially another stakeholder meeting. Like I said, we have to have everything finalized by the end of this month. So we will strongly consider, likely look to have another meeting so that we can propose additional changes. The timeline for that's going to be pretty quick. I'm not going to be able to provide a ton of leeway or lead time, I should say. Actually, that's the word I was looking for, lead time on notice. So I'm not going to be able to say, hey, we're going to have it on this date and give you a full month's notice. That's just not going to be feasible given the timeline that we are up against. So please keep in mind, so I will go ahead and apologize now for the short notice on whatever we potentially schedule, but it will be recorded again so that folks can participate. We will take a look at all of these comments, look at the perhaps putting together some sort of comment log just to make sure that we're organizing them and addressing them in the best way possible. So more to come from us on this based off of all this feedback. Next slide, please. Questions. Pretty sure I got a lot of those already. Does anybody have any last minute thoughts or questions or ideas or things that you would like to share with me at this point in time, or us, I should say? So Jody is
any
commenting.
Comments from the phone?
Sorry, John.
Sorry. Would anyone like to make a final comment by phone? If you can give me your name for the queue.
John, this is Ellen. I just have one more follow-up question.
Oh, thank you, Ellen. Have your name. Anyone else?
Katrina.
Katrina, thank you. Anyone else? Like we have things happening in the chat. Ellen, please go ahead.
Okay, thanks, Candace. I just wanted to confirm my understanding about all the timelines. So I think you said that, so late October is when the public health emergency is currently scheduled to end. And so your plan is to implement some form of this tiered structure. It sounds like maybe not likely substantially different from what we heard today, but TBD by that point. And then for the permanent waiver amendment, we need 4 months of lead time for CMS to enact that, and that would be March 10th in order to have continuity of service permanently moving forward. Is that an accurate restatement of what you said?
So yeah, thank you for that. So the public health emergency is scheduled to end October 26th. I have, based off of the amount of relooking that we need to do, I have not a lot of confidence, to be frank, that we will be able to roll this out by then. However, our, if you will, not public health emergency, but our allowances based off of the public health emergency don't end until March. So I want us to be able to roll something out prior to that. So I don't think that we're going to be able to get this completely ironed out and rolled out by the end of this month, realistically. Maybe, which would be really neat, but there's just too much to take back and consider. I'm not willing to roll something out that is this fraught with concerns and folks. What really gets me is folks being really concerned about the person-centeredness, and that is 100% against what we were looking to do. And so we really need to go back to the table and take a look at this. And so I don't have a timeline for when we initially roll this out, but it's not going to be tied directly to the overarching public health emergency. It will be tied more to our Appendix K. Does that help?
Okay, thanks. Yes.
Okay, good.
Thank you. This is John again. Was the next person, was it Kendra, Katrina? Beg your pardon? For the queue?
Katrina, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you now. Thank you. Please go ahead.
So my question is, so when the next meeting is coming, how do we get notified? Because I wasn't notified for this one, and I just want to make sure that I'm getting notified for this next meeting coming up.
Sure, and I'm sure John can kind of help with that. We will send out a notice using our constant contact and also post it on our website. This one was posted, and I know I personally talked about it last Friday during the webinar, and so during one of the Friday webinars. So it's on our website. Do you receive the constant contact emails, the notifications? Are you on that mailing list?
I don't, but my director probably does.
Okay, yeah. So just make sure you're on that email contact list, and then also, like I said, just check the website regularly. We'll have it posted there as well.
And then also, I just wanted to make sure that this is, do you know when this slideshow and everything will be updated? Because I only been on the phone call, sorry.
Oh, no problem. So it will be posted on the website. Likely, often it happens the same day, just to give everybody some grace, probably by the end of tomorrow at the latest.
Okay. That's all. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you. Okay, John, since we didn't have anybody else in the queue, I'm going to go back to the chat box if that's okay.
Very good. Thanks.
Great. So I see Tom is requesting data that we could share on utilization and budget numbers. I can ask for that information, and I can do my best to bring that back. Christy also wants data, so does John. Let's see here, Michelle. King wants to thank us for all the hard work we are doing on all the rates for all the waivers and services. Thank you, Michelle. I appreciate that. Tara, I know it sounds like we're picking this to shreds, but we do appreciate HICCUP's leadership in coming with these ideas. Thank you, Tara. I imagine there are many states that aren't having these conversations. Thanks for working with us to make the best out of an unimaginably difficult situation. Thank you, Tara. Yeah, I have heard that there are other states that haven't necessarily considered any sort of change in approach. I actually had a call with lots of states last week before, and was able to present how we were considering a tiered approach, and it was something that none of the other states had considered, so that was pretty exciting. But, traditionally Colorado is on the forefront of a lot of innovative ideas, and it's because we have stakeholders such as yourselves that are willing to engage with us and present your ideas and help us make sure that our services are sustainable and appropriate for all members. Okay, so looks like some more thanks for people. John, thank you so much for posting that link. So that is the link where you all could click to sign up to receive the constant contact emails that come out. Let's see here. And yeah, Bob wants to better understand the rationale behind the likely severe weekly service hour limit. Okay, John is typing in. So I'll let John go ahead and type that, get whatever he's going to post up there. Oh, thank you, John. Also, please consider the Department Attablance newsletter. This is a newsletter that we do put out and has a lot of really great information. So I encourage you all to take a look at that as well. I want to thank you all very much for your engagement. I want to thank you for your honest feedback. It's one of those things that if we don't have that, we're not going to get these services right. So I really, really appreciate everybody taking the time, really thinking through this with us so that we can get it right, knowing it's not going to be perfect. It's the budget climate that we're in and everything that's happening. It just makes it so incredibly hard. So the more that we can work together and come up with some viable solutions, the better for everybody. So I really appreciate you all taking your time. I appreciate you all providing the feedback. Please send additional feedback, ideas, thoughts, eureka moments, any of that to that inbox. We would really appreciate it. We would love some data as well. And if you all have it on how to operate and run these services, we are going to take all of this back and kind of, I won't say go back to the drawing board, but rethink some of the approaches here and see if we can come up with something that would hopefully be a little bit more sustainable and viable and workable for everybody. So with that, I want to thank you, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your Thursday. And I gave you back an extra 20 minutes, or I guess 19 minutes at this point.